there, this is Blondie, and yes, I'm going to say it, dimwit extraordinaire.
Oh, I'm going to have to come up with something bigger and better. I might need some help from the listeners so that we can just squash your whole...
No, we're not squashing.
Well, we're maybe going to bring you down a notch or two, Miss Extraordinaire.
No, my notches are fine. Leave them alone.
All right, whatever. I'm just jealous.
And who are you?
I'm Mr. T.
Okay, I didn't know she changed genders, but okay.
I'm going to come up with something really awesome, and you're going to be like, damn, I should have come up with that.
So basically, that's T.
Pretty much. She's hateful.
I am. Now, welcome to Grim Wit with Dimwits.
Welcome, everybody.
I'm glad you could come out today.
Yes, we are at your house, I should say, attempting to record. There has been so many noises outside. It's been quite challenging.
It's been quite, let's see, dogs barking, helicopters flying, ambulances, and I really do not live in a war zone.
I beg to differ. And not just your dogs, everybody's dogs.
Well, I know. It's the neighborhood. They're saying, hey, how's it going? How's your day?
Maybe they're filming Lady and the Tramp outside. I don't know. It's just like, what is happening right now?
That's why they needed the spaghetti.
Oh, there you go. The Italian music. Okay, we are really aging ourselves right now.
All right. Moving along. Moving along. Let's get our grim on. What do you say?
I say, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, well, that's nice. I'm sure people don't want to have 45 minutes of white noise.
I don't know. Maybe they would. Might be better than hearing the two of us.
Hey, now, I can hear you. I'm sitting right here.
Today, we are going to be talking about a big case, and there's a lot going on. It's pretty dark.
It's very dark.
It's very dark. I wanted to get into this case because this case is a little bit close to home for the two of us. So I thought it would be super interesting to bring it up, and it's kind of old, so I don't know if everybody would be familiar with it. But it's the case of the Night Stalker.
Ooh.
Ooh. So this is where we would say, appropriately, let the grim begin.
No, I didn't hear that.
Mr. T said, let the grim begin.
Well, extraordinary is saying, let's get our grim on.
I'm going to get sued for saying Mr. T and saying it just like him.
Yeah, I know, you and your mohawk.
Right. My jewelry is making noise right now.
Again, you're aging us. Stop it.
Anyway, Richard Ramirez was really unlike any other criminal. I find everything about him fascinating, but in a very, very dark way. He was the first of his kind because he was a random killer. He had no specific style of attack. He used no particular weapons. He had no pattern for when or where he attacked, and he had no victim type, age, race, or gender. This lack of any pattern was a brand new pattern in itself and greatly contributed to the difficulty in capturing him. Even the finest detectives struggled with building a profile for him, and with so many victim types, for quite some time, detectives weren't sure if they were dealing with one killer or multiple killers. Richard Ramirez was hunted for 15 long months, and during that time, he terrorized Californians with his insatiable lust to attack and kill over and over again. This is the story of the Night Stalker, one of America's most notorious serial killers. Now, I want to insert a little side note here. One of the reasons this story is so interesting to myself and Blondie is because in 1984 and 1985, while all of this serial killing was going on, Blondie and I were roommates during this reign of terror. We had a cute little apartment in Los Angeles County, and I remember being worried as panic enveloped the city.
I remember that being a very rough summer.
It was very, very rough. It was all people could talk about, and we made sure to double check our doors and windows every single day. We watched the news and heard about many of the attacks and murders that were way too close to home. So we lived in fear like everybody else. And it was such a relief when we heard that the Night Stalker was finally captured. And the way he was captured was awesome.
Oh my gosh, that was so great.
Right? I'll never forget it. It's like, yeah. Just from memory, there were some details about this killer that stood out all those years ago. Mainly the many, many ways he had brutally murdered, and it just seemed to keep getting worse. I remember seeing him on TV doing all his shenanigans regarding the pentagrams on his palms and just misbehaving and acting ridiculous in court. That was a big deal back then. People were shocked by his fearless antics. He had absolutely no regard for authority.
He was definitely a wackadoodle.
He really, really was. He was an attention whore.
And he just looking at him, he just saw evil.
He definitely looked evil. There's something not right about this guy. But then to see that he had groupies showing up for him was thoroughly disgusting. I definitely can't wrap my skull around that kind of lunacy. It was so perverse. What the heck were these girls thinking?
And really, is the dating pool that bad?
It must be. And if you see some of these women, they were nice looking women. Like, what happened to these girls that it's disgusting. I mean, there's some background stories about some of the things women did to get his attention too. It's just ridiculous and over the top. There's no way I could ever imagine having those types of feelings for that type of person.
You just don't understand the attraction.
No, I get the bad boy thing, but
okay.
This is not a bad boy.
That's not a bad boy.
This is the extreme.
The bad boy extraordinaire.
Yeah, this is not a bad boy. This is way beyond that. But this was a major news story for months until he was convicted. And then the whole story kind of faded out of the spotlight. But the Night Stalker definitely left an impression on me because his crimes were so horrific. And these things happened right in our backyard. But I never took the time to learn much about him until I began researching for this episode. I guess I assume, probably like most people, that Richard Ramirez had a troubled past. That's pretty obvious. But some of his story truly shocked me.
So this is going to be another one of those things of where you come from.
Kind of. And this is kind of why I wanted to focus on Richard Ramirez, because there really is so much in his background. I never heard about this. I mean, we were there when this was going on. I never heard anything about his background. His background definitely groomed him for who he became. And there's some part of that is really sad. You know what I mean? My heart's not bleeding for this guy or anything.
No.
But it is sad that people are in these types of environments and they become products of those environments. And I did want to focus a little bit on his background because I kind of see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I think at the time they weren't really focusing on him as an individual. I think it was the victims,
right? As it should
be,
as it should be then and should be now,
right?
But that's what makes this story interesting is actually digging into him a little bit more and seeing maybe some of the reasons why he was the way he was.
And and as much as you don't want to think that he wasn't born that way, it will be interesting to hear what happened to him.
Right.
You can't get past the fact of what he did.
No, you can't. And it is kind of a controversial, sensitive subject matter. Some people still ask, are people born evil or are they made evil? And this is like a perfect example of that kind of a debate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he's definitely got a lot of things contributing to his
wackadoodle.
Well, wackadoodle sounds nice. His depraved and evil personality. But anyway, let me make it very clear that there's absolutely nothing that could come close to being any kind of excuse for his viciousness that he inflicted on his victims. This man is definitely the devil incarnate. But digging into his childhood and family history was like a step-by-step instruction manual for how to create a deranged, sadistic monster. And in my opinion, this guy never, ever had a chance at any kind of normal. This is, I'm sure, still happening today.
But you're right. It doesn't excuse it. but it's sad.
It is very sad. So I want to dig into his family history just a little bit because I felt like it kind of built the foundation for why things happened in his life and his home life, what led him maybe down particular roads.
Mm-hmm.
So it may seem like I'm going way far back, but I feel it's important. His father, Julian Ramirez, was the oldest son in a large family. He was pulled from school in the first grade at 6 years old and was made to work hard on his father's farm. But he was a good kid, actually, and he never complained about it. He lost his mother at the age of 12, which is when his life drastically changed. Being the eldest son, he was blamed when any minor issues arose, and he quickly became the target of severe abuse by his father and his grandfather. And here we go again with vicious cycles, right?
So it makes you wonder if his grandfather abused his father.
No, I'm sure he did, because this is all very accepted. The family always said the Ramirezes had a quick and raging temper. But Julian vowed that when he had his own children, he would never treat them or beat them the way he was beaten.
Nice that he recognized it.
He recognized it, and he did try to break that vicious cycle, but we'll learn, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. When Julian was 14, he met and fell in love with Mercedes. They dated and married a few years later and quickly started a family. Julian was a loving husband and father, and Mercedes was a doting mother, and they were both very devout Catholics. As time went on and the family grew, the stress of life and trying to make ends meet weighed heavily on Julian and Mercedes. They both worked extremely hard and became more and more frustrated with not being able to get ahead financially.
Aww.
So, to me, this part of the story is very crucial. Even though it sounds like background, I think it does play an important part in what happened to these children. They lived in El Paso, Texas, one of North America's largest manufacturing centers, which unfortunately led to exposure to lethal gases and toxic chemicals that plagued the area. The U.S. government was conducting nuclear bomb testing in nearby New Mexico, which is approximately 200 miles from their hometown, but nuclear fallout had made its way into their city, affecting the landscape, cattle, milk, meat, water, and people. During that time, the rate of newborns afflicted with birth defects skyrocketed.
Do you happen to know what year?
Well, I know Ramirez is born in 1960.
Okay.
So I'm going to guess this is in the 50s. That's just a guess. On top of that, Mercedes worked long hours at a boot manufacturing company and was ingesting and absorbing fumes from color pigments and tanning chemicals on a daily basis. She was supposed to wear a protective mask and clothing to keep her safe from these hazardous materials, but the company did not provide the equipment. The employees were supposed to buy that themselves, and because they were poor, she could not afford it. So she was heavily exposed to chemical hazards and toxic substances for years, even during her multiple pregnancies.
So let me get this straight. They know these chemicals are poisonous, toxic, could be hazardous to unborn children. Yet no, they don't supply the gloves and masks and the clothing.
No, ma'am, they did not. It was a different time back then.
That's sad.
That's what I'm saying. All these circumstances contribute to what becomes the Night Stalker. It sounds like it maybe doesn't, but it really does.
I mean, you go from one thing to the next.
Right. Julian and Mercedes, their firstborn son, Reuben, was born with golf-sized lumps covering his tiny body, and they thought he was going to die. But after a few days, the lumps started to absorb back into his body. He stabilized, and they took him home.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's horrifying. Those lumps went back into his body. I'd be more scared of that than anything.
They didn't know what the lumps were?
No. Golf ball-sized lumps, and now they're back in his system. I would have rather they came out. So that part was like, ooh, that's a problem.
And that's just his brother.
That's just the first one. Their second son, Joseph, was born seemingly healthy and normal, except for that he cried constantly. The doctor said he was fine and would grow out of it. But at 17 months, he was diagnosed with Collieri's disease, which forces the bones to grow in a bowed shape. This severely handicapped Joseph.
So the doctor just said, oh, he's fine. He'll grow out of it.
He's fine.
Put some dirt on it.
Yeah, he's not the worst of the bunch.
I mean, you just look at things then and things now.
Right.
How they and that's the way life goes. But wow.
Yeah. So I'm saying, like, this is just more evidence that things are terribly wrong. Their third son, Robert, was born physically healthy, but over the years it became apparent that he was mentally challenged. Their next child was a much-awaited little girl, and they named her Ruth. She was born healthy with no documented disabilities. This is 1 out of 4. How, as far as the health?
Oh, the health.
The health.
No, the health can.
1 out of 4 kids is born normal.
But, and what are they blaming it on? Do they even know what to blame it on?
The environment. But back then, nobody's documenting this. This is just happening and people are just dealing with it. Then 4 years after Ruth, they unexpectedly became pregnant again. And on February 29th, 1960, Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez, also known as Richie, was born.
Thank goodness they shortened that.
Right? He was cute, healthy, happy, and naturally the family doted on him.
So now you're talking 2 out of 5.
So far.
Okay.
Yes. So let's get into Richard Ramirez's childhood. He was always happy and bubbly, but his parents soon realized he had ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So they had to constantly keep an eye on him to make sure that he didn't get into any trouble. At the age of 2, while his parents were working, he had a babysitter named Socorro. Richie, even as a toddler, always loved music and dancing, and he could not get enough of it. But when he asked Socorro to play the music so he could dance, she continued watching TV and completely ignored him. So little Richie decided to turn the music on himself. But to reach the radio, he had to climb up a tall dresser in his parents' bedroom. But before he reached the top, the dresser toppled over right on top of his little body and slammed hard into his head. He ended up with a major concussion and required 30 stitches to close the gash on his head. Richie healed quickly, as many toddlers do, and went back to being his usual hyper self. 30 stitches on a 2-year-old's little head had to be a humongous gash.
That was huge.
Yeah.
So he climbed, he fell, and the dresser fell on top of him?
He climbed up, obviously made the dresser go off balance, and it just toppled right over onto him, and I guess the heavy part of it hit him in the head.
Oh my gosh. And all little Richie wanted to do was dance.
All he wanted to do was dance, that's right. His sister Ruth looked out for him and treated him like he was her very own living doll. He really loved Ruth as well. They were very close. Ruth said, quote, "My brother never slept. He was always up and moving around at night," end quote. Sounds like he was a night person even back then. One day, while Ruth was out playing on swings, 5-year-old Richie saw her and quickly ran over to her. She didn't see him at all, and her swing ended up striking him with great force and knocked him unconscious. He was sent back to the hospital with another major concussion and received more stitches.
He was 5 here. So
He was 5.
3 years later. Okay.
Yep. 2 major head traumas.
Under 10.
Under 5. Well, 5 and under. As time went on, Richard's older brothers began to display learning disabilities and started getting into trouble. Reuben, the oldest son, was the first to get into major trouble when he was caught and arrested for being high and stealing a car with a friend. When his father, Julian, was called to the police station, he was extremely upset and embarrassed that his son was ruining the Ramirez family's good name. Julian was infuriated, and for the first time, he broke his promise to himself and viciously beat his teenage son. Ruben was battered and bruised, but unfortunately, that didn't stop him. He just kept getting high on drugs, huffing glue, and finding trouble.
He wanted to change. He wanted to break that cycle, and
he got to his breaking point. And I guess there was no going back after that.
And that was his oldest, correct?
This is his oldest son, yes. Joseph, the second son, ended up in a wheelchair due to his disease. And although he was bullied and made fun of by other children, he did better in school than his older brother Reuben. His limitations humbled him, and he actually grew into a good and decent person.
Well, that's nice to hear.
I know, right? But Robert, the third son, was following in his oldest brother's footsteps and also found trouble in the neighborhood. These two brothers ended up in a special needs class at school. Their special education teacher, who appeared to be going way out of his way to give the brothers more time and special attention, ended up being a pedophile and was sexually abusing both of them.
Just when they are getting help, supposedly?
Yeah.
Much needed help?
Right. The teacher even had the nerve to come to their home while the parents worked to help the boys. Richie, who was much younger, would also be with them in their sessions at the house and was definitely exposed to the abuse and more than likely abused as well.
Awful.
Let's just throw that in. When Richie was 10 years old, he seemed normal and was kind of the class clown. He had lots of friends at school. One day while sitting in class after just being silly, he suddenly started to slowly slump down in his chair. His classmate behind him thought he was just messing around. But then when he hit the floor hard and started convulsing, the teacher ran to help. All the students were told to go to the window and look outside while this was happening. Following this incident, Richie was diagnosed with epilepsy and prone to grand mal seizures. His doctor stated that this was possibly from the 2 traumatic head injuries he'd suffered as a child. But Richard received no medication and was told he would just grow out of it.
Again, with a growing out of it.
Yeah, that's what they did back then. Pat him on the back, send him on their way. And for anyone that doesn't know, epilepsy is a disorder in which nerve cells in the brain are disturbed, causing seizures. It may occur as a result of a genetic disorder or brain injury. Sounds like he could have gotten it both ways.
Could have been.
That same year, Richie was quarterback on the school football team. He really enjoyed being part of the team and was quite skilled. But following another epileptic seizure on the field, his coach abruptly kicked him off the team, saying that it was too big of a responsibility should anything happen to him. Richard was heartbroken. You know, even something like this that may seem so minor probably played a big role in him not having that social outlet where he felt valued, important, and part of a team. Those social skills are vital at that age.
And in growing and just everything.
Everything.
You have to feel like you're part of something, especially being on the football team. You're right. He's valued. It gives him that up.
Yeah. He's good at something that he can take pride in.
Right.
He's admired, you know. All those things are extremely important. He continued to have seizures throughout his teenage years. I'm sure that didn't help with his social life.
Absolutely not.
As a preteen, Richard was lost. He wasn't close to his brothers, as they were much older and constantly getting into trouble, and now he couldn't even play sports. He wasn't close to his father due to the rage he had seen him now regularly inflict on his brothers. His dad even started abusing Richard and would sometimes tie him to a cross in a cemetery and leave him there overnight. What kind of freaking twisted is that?
you're talking about setting him up for the rest of his life. That right there, it makes you wonder now about his father.
Well, and it makes you wonder why he's so comfortable with death and dark things. And he had to sleep out there. That was his punishment. And so you either get comfortable or, you become a wreck. So sounds like he got comfortable.
And who would think to put them out?
Yeah, I mean, he could have been killed. There was nobody there to protect him, and he's tied to a cross.
And it's just a little reaching, but forget people doing anything to him. I mean, animals?
Yeah, anything. He was very vulnerable. And he was a kid.
Wow.
So that was, when I read that, I was like, come on, man. This is too much.
This is, I think, where it almost skirts everything he's gone through up until this point, making him who he turned out to be. But having a father with that kind of mental brain capacity to do that, maybe some of it was
mental,
yes.
Genetic.
Thank you. That was the word I was looking for.
Yes, maybe it was genetic, because who does that? And this is the baby of the family.
I wonder where his mother was.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of disturbing to think his mother didn't stop the beatings and didn't stop something like this.
And she may have been afraid of herself. Who knows?
Maybe. But unexpectedly, Richard found peace in the cemetery and later would often sleep there because he felt safer there than at home.
Oh.
So see, it all turned around, but that's, I'm sure, a coping mechanism. But this self-isolation left him with no male role models that he could connect with in his life. So between his father, his brothers, his coach that rejected him, and even a pedophile teacher, he had no one to show him any kind of acceptance, love, or just any kind of normalness. Any kind of normalcy.
At least the male portion of the family.
Which is vital.
Because didn't his sister and his mother dote on him? But you have to have that male role model in your life.
Exactly. Someone's got to teach you how to be a good and decent man. Mm-hmm. And there was nobody there to teach him.
They just were abusing him.
Yeah, they were teaching him the opposite. So Richard spent as little time as possible in his dysfunctional home. His older cousin, Miguel, also known as Mike, had just returned from Vietnam as a decorated Green Beret combat veteran, earning 4 medals. He was a hero. He and only one other soldier survived out of a platoon of 20 soldiers when they were surrounded by the Viet Cong. Richard was absolutely in awe of him.
And I can see that.
I can see that too.
You need that hero. You need that person in your life. It's like, wow.
Right.
Look what he did.
And everybody is confirming that this guy is a hero, right? Mm-hmm. So he's got to have his head on straight, according, to maybe the way a kid would see it. So Cousin Mike explained that in Vietnam, he could do whatever he pleased to Vietnamese prisoners and considered it his duty as an American to abuse and kill them. He learned that the Vietnamese believed they could not enter heaven if they lost any of their body parts. Their bodies had to be whole in order for them to get in. So Mike took sadistic pleasure in mutilating the prisoners he captured. Many soldiers were even known to have human ear necklaces. What the heck?
Okay, I keep waiting for a little ray of sunshine here.
Nope. You're going to be waiting a long time.
Where's the Lucky Charms guy?
You're going to be waiting a long time in this story.
This is undescribable.
Right. It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
It really is.
You're describing it. Now we just need to believe it.
Yep. And it just keeps going. It's the gift that keeps giving. So Mike also bragged that he had killed and raped at least 29 Vietnamese women. He even took Polaroids of some of the women being viciously raped by him. He decapitated a woman and took a picture pleasuring himself with her head.
Oh.
Yeah. New level there.
And it makes you wonder what happened to this guy for him to be this way and think it's okay.
Right. He also brought home a collection of 8 shrunken heads that he used as pillows to sleep on in Vietnam. He shared all of these gruesome photos and stories with a very impressionable 12-year-old Richard Ramirez many times over. Mike told him that, quote, having power over life and death was a high unlike any other, an incredible rush. It was godlike. You control who lives and who dies, end quote.
I want to know who Cousin Mike's male role model was.
That's probably another story altogether.
I'm starting to think that, yes, it's his environment, what he was raised in, but I also think it's a family gene.
There's something not right here.
A combination of both, maybe?
Well, we're not done with Mike. Yep, we're gonna.
I don't know. I'm kind of over Mike.
Yeah, I'm over Mike too, but he does a lot more than this.
Lovely.
So Mike then introduced Richard to marijuana.
Of course he did.
Of course he did. And taught him the skills a soldier needed for jungle warfare.
Okay, I said that too soon. Of course he did.
Of course he did. You know, because he's 12, so he needs to know this. He needs to know how to be invisible and how to kill with stealth.
Especially living in the cemetery.
Right. What the hell was Mike thinking? He also taught him how to burglarize homes so he could always have money. He said, quote, it's us the poor against them the rich, end quote. Cousin Mike quickly became Richard's idol.
It sounds like Cousin Mike turned into, what's his name? I was going to say Peter Pan. I know that's not right. Robin Hood. Turns into Robin Hood.
We should be so lucky that he had any Robin Hood tendencies, because he doesn't. Mike was married to a strong Hispanic woman named Jessie. She would nag Mike about wasting too much time with his little cousin instead of getting a job to help support her and their kids. Well, this really irritated Mike. One day when Jessie came home from the grocery store with their 2 boys, she got upset that her husband was again not looking for a job. She confronted Mike and started to yell at him. Mike calmly got up, went to the refrigerator, and pulled out a .38 revolver. He told Jessie to shut her mouth or he was going to shoot her. Jessie stood her ground and dared him to shoot her. So he lifted the gun and shot her point blank in the face, killing her instantly. I'm going to keep going.
Okay. I'll let you go a little bit, then I have a question.
Richard and their 2 young boys witnessed the cold-blooded murder. Mike looked at Richard and said, quote, that's how you handle it when a woman doesn't listen, end quote. Then Mike made now 13-year-old Richard swear he would never tell anybody about what he saw that day, and whether it was out of fear or respect, he never told a soul.
So I wonder, was he training his sons like this? Did he tell his sons the same thing he told Richard?
I got the impression, it doesn't say the sons' ages, but I got the impression they were very little.
Oh, so it may not have comprehended.
Yeah.
Or Mike hadn't had a chance to.
Right. It sounded to me like they were still very young.
And Richard was in his teens.
And Richard was right.
In his teens.
He could groom Richard to be a little him, I think is where he was trying to go with this.
Well, he had 2 boys. He could have done that with those.
He shouldn't have done that with anybody.
You're absolutely right.
Mike was arrested for the murder, and when he went to court, it was determined that he had PTSD from the war, and he ended up only serving 4 years in a mental institution before he was released back into society. So this lack of punishment probably played a big part in Richard's ideas of how the criminal justice system worked. You literally could get away with cold-blooded murder.
And you don't even go to prison. You just
party at a mental institution.
Wow.
While Mike was institutionalized, he asked Richard and his father to go to his home and grab some money and jewelry that belonged to his dead wife. While Richard was rummaging through Jessie's purse and going through her personal belongings, it made him feel strangely close to her. He knew he was invading her privacy, and it gave him a rush. He loved it.
Setting things up.
Those little rushes that make him do the things he do.
Makes him feel alive.
That makes him do the things he ends up doing later in life.
I like when you said do.
Yeah, I know. I was being all cool. But it's so creepy. So creepy.
Very creepy.
Richard also took the war Polaroids that his cousin had shared with him. He studied them and fantasized about violent sex acts. He wasn't bothered by the idea of murdering someone either. Being in control of life and death was exciting to him. But after a while, he needed more violent scenes, so he started buying detective magazines. He never wanted to be a detective, though. He looked at the crime scene pics wanting to be the rapist and the killer. And reading the cases in those magazines only stirred up more violent lust. I remember those detective magazines, and they were way too gory for most people, myself included. But it never would have even crossed my mind to want to see them from the criminal's perspective. That is just so twisted.
It's almost like a little manual.
Right? It's insane.
I don't remember them, but...
Oh, I remember them because it was a big deal. They were up there with like the naughty magazines. You know what I mean? It was the naughty ones.
Wow.
I feel naughty saying naughty.
Like the big jug one.
How do you know about those? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, well, some things I'm just going to take to the grave.
During this time in Richard's life, he was fully immersed in his demented thoughts and dreams, so he boldly denounced his Catholic upbringing. His thoughts were the extreme opposite of Christian teachings, so it made no sense to try and serve a God who would never approve of who he truly desired to be. But serving Satan definitely made sense. Becoming a Satanist was definitely more in line with how he wanted to live his life. He even convinced himself that acting on his desires would honor Satan. This conversion motivated him and gave him purpose to fulfill his dark fantasies. Satan wouldn't judge him. Whatever he would do, he would now do it for Satan. During this time period, he developed his love for dark, heavy metal music. He felt that the music spoke to him.
So Satan was his motivation?
Yeah, because Satan would love everything he was doing, and God would hate it. In a very twisted way, that makes sense. If you're going to be that guy anyway, why are you going to keep being rejected?
Why not be the one that takes control?
Yeah, the one that lets you do whatever you want and says, good job. It's so twisted, I know. I'm not trying to be...
I'm trying to be flip about it.
Right? I mean, I'm trying to kind of see it from all angles. It's like, in his world, I could see how that makes sense.
I'm glad we're not in his world.
No, thank you. At 13 years old, Richard moved in with his older sister, Ruth. She was a newlywed, and her husband, Roberto Avila, turned out to be a notorious peeping Tom.
Do they know anybody normal?
Nope. He had a very high libido and was a habitual pervert who demanded sex from his wife constantly. He started taking Richard out with him and showed him the best spots and how to peep and avoid being caught. It was a regular nightly ritual for them to go out and peep in the neighborhood. They then started experimenting with hard drugs, taking acid, using mushrooms. After 2 years of marriage, Ruth eventually divorced Roberto because he became so addicted to peeping that he would rather peep than pay any attention to her. At this point, practically all of the things that could poison a child's mind were a major part of Richard's life.
It honestly sounds like at least all the men in his life were serial killer 101 teachers.
Every single man was a monster of some sort.
I just don't understand how they didn't know any normal people.
It does seem weird. Like, what are the chances every single person right. You know has something majorly wrong in the head? Anyway, at 15 years old, Richard got a job at a Holiday Inn hotel doing light maintenance. But when someone got fired, he ended up with their master room key for the entire hotel. This gave him lots of opportunity to steal from and peep on the guests. You know, those two skills he was taught.
Right.
He continually fantasized about sneaking in and tying certain women up and sexually assaulting them. But he started with stealing and became really good at it. He was so skilled that his nickname was Dedos, which means fingers in Spanish.
Oh, that's a nice name.
Right? That says a lot. While at work, he noticed a curvy young woman alone in a room. He watched her for a bit and decided she would be the one he acted out his sexual fantasy with. When she got up to go into the bathroom, he decided to slip into her room. He hid in the closet, and when she walked out of the bathroom, he tackled her and told her not to scream. He tied her up and was trying to rape her when all of a sudden the hotel door burst open. Her husband, who was a really big guy, had just went out to grab a bite to eat. When he came back into the room, he saw what was going on and lunged at Richard and beat him till he was unconscious. Richard was taken to the hospital. When his mother came, he told her that the woman had come on to him. He was the innocent victim, and it had been a big misunderstanding. The couple were from out of town and wanted to put the whole thing behind them, so they did not pursue any charges against him. Here's another fine example of how you can get away with whatever you want with no consequences, and I'm sure he even got some special attention at home being the victim and all. I also wonder if the husband, upon finding out that this pervert was only 15 years old, was a little worried about charges for himself, because that would definitely cross my mind.
I can't believe he got a job at Holiday Inn at 15.
I know.
And he had that master key.
That was a mistake. A couple of years later, his cousin Mike was released from the mental institution, and he and Richard again began to hang out. You know, that definitely says a lot about Mike. There's something really wrong with him when he constantly has to be hanging out with pretty much a kid.
Yeah, makes you wonder if there was something else going on.
Yeah.
That's not a fact. I was just curious about that.
There's some kind of weird connection between them. You know, it's bizarre. They began nightly runs to burglarize in order to constantly get high. Richard mastered these skills with his cousin and prepared for his move to California because he thought that's where all the rich people live. In his mind, burglaries there will make him rich fast. Cousin Mike eventually remarried and developed an addiction to heroin. Who the hell marries Cousin Mike with his past?
Well, you said earlier, who the hell has groupies for...
Ugh, what's wrong with women? I mean...
I know the dating pool is just not that small.
No, it's... Anyway.
There are other alternatives.
They can make little Richard Ramirez's together, because that's exactly what will happen.
That's a lovely thought.
At 18, Richard outgrew El Paso and moved to Southern California in February of 1978. He loved California with its ocean and half-dressed women roaming the beach. This was where he wanted to be. For money, he brought weed from El Paso that he bought cheap to sell for a higher price in L.A. The textbook business plan.
Right? Sure, he got it through one of his connections.
I'm sure. He fantasized about living in a mansion in Los Angeles with a horde of women as his personal sex slaves. But instead, he ended up living on Skid Row.
Color me surprised.
You know, same thing. A little different.
You know, pot selling that buys you a mansion and a horde of women.
Exactly. Once in a while, he could afford to live in the Cecil Hotel for a bit, depending on his haul from burglarizing homes, which also fed his new gambling and cocaine addictions. I see he's already fitting in with the locals.
He's adapting quite well.
He didn't want to stand out or anything.
Blend, Richard,
blend. He believed that stealing gave him what he was entitled to, balancing the system to get what he needed from the rich. But he was forced to stop the gambling in order to pay for cocaine. He needed cocaine more because when he injected it, he felt closer to Satan.
So he's setting his priorities, I see.
Exactly.
Yes.
He's pretty devout. And under its influence, his confidence was through the roof. But his habit got so bad that he started living out of stolen cars for days at a time and eventually turned to the cheaper PCP, also known as angel dust, which took off in popularity during this time. The drugs also affected his mind and made him realize he no longer cared about traditional sex. Instead, he only wanted violent rape and bondage, and he needed to satisfy that soon.
Goals. You got to have a goal.
Right? Whatever motivates you.
No.
It's not funny. We shouldn't even make fun of it because it's
not
sad.
great. It's
hard when you can't come up with a word. It's like, my mind is reeling. On the streets, he met a woman who asked him for drugs. They went back to her place and got high. He wanted to have sex, but the woman told him not to waste his time because she was a lesbian. So at 3 a.m., when the high and drugs ran out, she kicked him out of her apartment. He was furious. So he waited till he saw her lights go out in her apartment, and then he made his way back in through a window he had unlocked earlier. He tied her up and brutally raped her. He then left, successfully acting out one of his dark fantasies.
And here we go.
He premeditated that by leaving that window open.
He did.
Wow. Richard ended up finding Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible. He studied it and began attending church services. He met another follower and they hung out together for about 2 months.
Okay, I might be naive about this. Is there really a Satanic Bible?
Yes. I've never seen one, but I've heard.
I've never heard that there was one.
There
apparently
is.
There was even a church you could go to.
Yes, it's a real religion.
Wow.
Yep. They get tax write-offs and everything else, just like everybody else. It's disturbing. His new friend re-emphasized that why would anyone worship a God who will never approve of your life choices when you could worship Satan and be praised for your sins? He even went to San Francisco just to meet Anton LaVey and attend his satanic church. While there, he went to a service and connected to the rituals being performed on naked women. Following this service, he called his mother and told her while he was worshiping, he felt an ice-cold hand grip his shoulder, and he knew he had been personally touched by Satan himself, so she needed to pray for him. First off, I never imagined that Satan's hand would be ice cold.
No.
That is not the way it's been portrayed. It should be kind of hot and flamey.
I mean, everything that you would imagine, you touches it and it psst.
Right?
Yeah.
A little fire coming out of there. A little electrocution.
A little steam.
Secondly, why would he ask his mother to pray for him? She's obviously praying to God. So I didn't understand that.
I thought the exact same thing.
Yeah. Why would he want a Christian prayer?
Is that just a moment of clarity that he had, or?
I don't know.
And she was Catholic, wasn't she?
She was very Catholic.
Yeah.
So it seems like maybe at this point, he was a little torn between good and evil.
Oh.
That's just me reading between the lines, but it makes no sense that he would ask for prayer. So following this, his beloved sister Ruth came out to visit and tried desperately to talk Richard into coming back home to El Paso so they could help him spiritually and to kick his drug habit. But Richard only responded to her by playing Highway to Hell, and then he injected himself with cocaine right in front of her. She left without him.
To me, it sounds like playing Highway to Hell and injecting himself. That's a big old hell no.
F you.
Yeah.
It's a big old F you. Over time, he would go back and forth between San Francisco and Los Angeles. But during one of his visits to San Francisco, on April 10th, 1984, 9-year-old Mei Ling was returning home to her San Francisco apartment with her 8-year-old brother Mike. They had been hanging out at a friend's house. On the way up the elevator, Mei realized she had lost a $1 bill. She thought it slipped out of her pocket and possibly fell near the basement door. So she sent her brother to their apartment and went to look for the bill. 15 to 30 minutes later, her family realized she was not back and went to look for her. In the meantime, a young mother and son started to head toward the basement, but they noticed blood on the floor, so they ran back to the elevator, where a young man in dark clothing was now on the elevator and fiddling nervously with the buttons. It is believed they encountered Richard Ramirez, fleeing the crime scene. May's little brother Mike went to the basement to look for her and found her partially nude, stabbed and strangled body hanging from a water pipe by her blouse. There was blood everywhere. A San Francisco detective said, quote, "If you can picture Christ on the cross, that's how she was hanging. It appeared to be a satanic ritual killing," end quote. Mei Ling's murder was connected to Richard Ramirez through DNA many years later. She was his first known murder victim and the catalyst for a crime spree so horrific it would change the course of California forever.
Isn't this the way that he had her hanging? Isn't this the way his father left him in the cemetery?
Ah, good point. Yeah, well, his father actually hung him on a cross. It makes me wonder if maybe he had her arms spread out like that.
Yeah. Hanging like Christ on the cross.
Imitating his past.
Yeah.
You know, so people want to say things don't mess you up. Things mess you up.
Things mess you up. Or people mess you up.
People mess you up. Situations mess you up. Now, back in Los Angeles on June 28, 1984, just a few months after Mei Ling's murder, Richard Ramirez was on a drug-induced high, and he needed some money, so he decided to go out and rob. He picked a random apartment solely because the window was open and it had a good escape route. He felt that it didn't matter at all who resided in the apartments he chose because Satan had his back and was watching over him, making sure that whatever evil needed to be done would be. Inside, 79-year-old Jenny Vincow was fast asleep. Jenny had white hair and stood 5 foot 9 inches. She had moved to beautiful Southern California to be close to her son, who conveniently lived in the apartment above hers. Her son wanted to be closer to his aging mother, so he could take care of her and check in on her often. But that night, Richard Ramirez went in through the open window and then waited to see if he woke anybody up. When no one stirred, he went further inside and was immediately enraged at how poor Jenny was. He had picked the wrong apartment, and he desperately needed money for his next high. He searched for anything of value, but there was no money or jewelry. Rage built as he watched her sleep. He went to her and woke her up by stabbing a 6-inch hunting knife through her chest. He continued thrusting at her and was aroused while slicing her neck ear to ear. The cut ran so deep he nearly decapitated her. He didn't stop, though. He stabbed her 3 more times because the motion of the knife entering her body sexually excited him. Through this, he felt himself drawing much closer to Satan than he ever imagined.
I can't even imagine.
The fact that you could compare sex and stabbing, it's so deep.
So sex, stabbing, and getting closer to Satan. Getting closer to Satan? What kind of mind?
I've said it before, we're never going to make sense out of what crazy people do, because fortunately, we're not crazy.
Well,
that's to be debated.
Not in this way.
But no, for him to even say that, it's like, what the hell is wrong with you? Yeah.
79 years old and then mad because she didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So let's just get off by killing her.
Yeah. Mad because she's poor. Killing was a high far more thrilling than any drug had ever made him feel. He stayed in Jenny's apartment for over an hour. At around 5 a.m., he finally left the apartment and drove away in his stolen car with fresh blood still on his clothes. He came to a stop sign and nearly ran through it, but something in the back of his mind told him to make a complete stop. So he did. As soon as he passed through the intersection, he saw a police vehicle. This only confirmed that Satan had warned him and was definitely taking care of him to not get caught.
Basically, he's not abiding the law like a normal person would do. It was Satan's doing so that he didn't run through the light or the signal or the stop sign. I'm sorry.
Well, in this situation, I think it was more meaningful because he was in a stolen car and he had fresh blood all over him. So if he would have been pulled over at this moment, the jig would have been up. So it was more important than just stopping and running a stop sign, which is why he thought Satan was controlling the situation for him. I know. Jenny Vincow was discovered by her son the following morning when he arrived to bring her some food. Police were called and were horrified at the level of depravity of this murder. Jenny was covered in blood, nearly decapitated, and the crotch of her girdle had been cut away, indicating that she had been sexually assaulted. Fingerprints were discovered, but they would need a suspect first before they could compare the prints to anybody. The murder of Jenny changed Richard. He spent a lot of time chasing that same high that killing gave him, but quickly realized that cocaine would never create that same sensation, and he needed to rob at least 2 to 3 times a day to get anywhere near high enough anymore. And he was getting frustrated.
Oh, poor guy.
I know. The struggle is real. One night, while Richard was high, he drove a stolen car recklessly and ended up crashing into a Los Angeles bus station. He was arrested and spent time in jail. While there, he realized cocaine made him slip up, and he didn't want to be just another Skid Row junkie. He desperately wanted the killing high, and if he was going to be successful, there was no room for error. So he quit hard drugs in lieu of the ultimate high. He would become a killing machine.
Again, with the goals of life.
It's just so hard to... There's no reasoning in this for a normal person. None of this makes sense to us. But to him, it made all the sense in the world. So, during this time, following the 1984 LA Summer Olympics, LA's crime had plummeted while the city prepared for this huge event. The people of Los Angeles were excited, and many were leaving their guard down, enjoying the limelight with their newfound camaraderie. The Queen of England visited, the Pope even visited, and Los Angeles was at its best. The entire city was filled with glamour and excitement, but all of this extravagance also attracted some very dangerous people, like Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez famously said, "We are all evil in some form or another. Are we not?"
And that's someone who's crazy and has no capability of reasoning, common sense, right or wrong.
Well, and then there's levels of evil. I mean, you can be evil and tell a lie. That doesn't mean you're evil and killing people. It's a different level.
Right.
So, yeah, in his world, it was insanity. There was a long lapse from June 1984 to March 1985 when the actual killing spree started. It is believed that there were other murders during that time frame that are not accounted for. Police felt it definitely wasn't his first rodeo that year in 1985. But 2 Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau detectives were highly focused on finding the killer. And there had been quite a few child rape abductions as well. At first, they weren't sure if there was a link or not between the crimes, but Frank Salerno, also known as the Italian Stallion, was one of the department's most highly respected detectives. The second detective was Gil Carrillo, who was newly transferred into homicide and was known as the Cucuy, which means the boogeyman in Spanish. But this was mainly because at 6'4", he was a scary-looking guy. The two detectives began to work the cases and started to see some potential connections.
So you have the Italian Stallion, wasn't that Rocky?
I think so.
So you have Rocky and the boogeyman.
And the boogeyman.
Okay, just want to make sure we're on the same page here.
At this point, several months had passed with no repercussions for Richard from the murder of Jenny Vincow. More proof that Satan was watching over Richard. So on March 17th, 1985, Richard decided to purchase a .22 caliber handgun. He specifically chose this weapon because if you shoot someone in the skull, the bullet will usually ricochet in a zigzag pattern within the skull without exiting. This would create havoc for the brain tissue and is almost always fatal. He then stole a car and decided he was going to try out his new toy and murder that night.
Makes you wonder how he knew that fact.
I wonder if maybe good old cousin Mike told him that.
Oh, that's right.
Because that's pretty specific.
That's very specific.
He had so many
great influences in his
right,
life.
So many great and so many avenues for this type of information. It's incredible. Later that same evening of March 17th, Richard Ramirez was on the freeway and noticed a little gold car with an attractive woman in it. He decided to follow that car. When Maria Hernandez pulled into her garage, she got out of her car, walked to the doorway inside the garage, and pressed the button to automatically shut the garage door. As the garage door was closing, she heard a noise behind her, and when she turned around, she saw a man creeping under the door. As it closed, the man lost his AC/DC baseball cap and didn't realize it. The tall, thin man, all dressed in black, started walking toward her until she was staring straight down the barrel of his gun. She instinctively put her hands in front of her face while holding her keys. The man then point-blank shot her in the face. But the bullet deflected off the keys in her hand. She had the sense to fall down and play dead. When he thought he had killed her, he kicked her off to the side and went into her condominium where her roommate, 34-year-old Dale Okazaki, had heard the shot. Dale heard the door open and quickly hid behind the kitchen island, but it was too late. Richard had seen her. He decided to play a little game with her. He knew that if he slowed his breathing, at some point she may think he had left. Then undoubtedly she would pop her head up over the counter to make sure he was gone. She did. And when he could finally see the fear in her eyes, he shot her right between them. Seeing the frightened look on her face was worth the wait. This is what excited him, which is why he didn't try to kill her roommate, Maria, from behind. In fact, when he slid into the garage, he intentionally slapped the top of her car to get her to turn around and look at him right before he shot her. Seeing their scared faces was thrilling.
He has enough forethought and enough common sense and enough thinking ahead of the game to play this game going, okay, now if I can slow my breathing. So that's actual logical thinking.
Right. He's not a stupid man. Even with all the drugs and all the head trauma, he's not a stupid man. He's definitely capable of figuring things out. These are things you and I would never think of that.
Not at all.
Even if that was the plan from the beginning, how do I get him to turn around? I mean, it's not something that naturally comes to your mind. So it's like he's instinctively a hunter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like I said, to slow his breathing.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me wonder if Mike had taught him that, or his perverted brother-in-law, or
Oh, that's right. The peeping
Yes,
Tom.
yeah, or whoever else was influencing him. Just like I said, so many options for who to point the finger at. After going through the house and finding nobody else to kill, he decided to leave through the front door. But while he had been in the house, Maria had jumped up from the garage floor and started running down the alleyway when she heard the second gunshot. While running, she worried for her roommate, so she decided to go back and enter through the front of the condo to try to help Dale, thinking the killer would come back out through the garage door. But he didn't. When they saw each other at the front door, Ramirez was quite shocked. He went to her and held out his gun to shoot her, but she faced him and said, "You've already shot me once. Do you really have to shoot me again?" Oddly enough, he smiled, put the gun down, and casually walked away. He had left his first living victim. In a twist, as Detective Gil Carrillo was called to the crime scene and began investigating, the mother of Maria Hernandez showed up and saw the detective. They quickly realized she was his childhood friend and neighbor that had lived 3 doors down when they were kids. So this murder investigation became very personal, very fast.
The forethought of her to sit there and say, "You've already done this." I mean, that takes balls.
She had some balls at that point.
Like, you've already done it, so back the hell up. You're not going to shoot me again. Well, look good for her.
I know. Well, that saved her life.
Who would think that?
I don't think I'd have the gonads to do that.
And I don't even know if I'd go back. I mean, I hate to say it, but this man's going to kill you.
Yeah.
I give her credit, number 1, for going back.
Right.
And number 2, for saying, you know what?
Yeah, you had your chance.
Take that gun and shove it, basically.
Right. You had your chance and you messed up, so that's it. No do-overs.
Toodles.
No do-overs, mister.
That's right.
And he listened. I guess he found it pretty charming or whatever, pretty interesting.
I think it really threw him off. He wasn't in control at that moment. She was.
Exactly. You might be right. It's the control thing.
Yeah. Wow. Good for her.
I know. That's kind of a cool story. And then the detectives come to the scene and finds out that her mother knows that detective. How crazy is that?
Small world.
Right.
Really? 3 doors down.
3 doors down. They grew up together. And it's funny because this was all part of the special on Netflix. And as Detective Carrillo is telling this story, he said he's at the house and he hears a woman in the background say, "Gilbert, is that you?" And he says he turns around and says, "Nobody calls me Gilbert. Like, who's calling me Gilbert?" And then he looks over and he sees her and he goes, "Pumpkin, is that you?" It was like a really tender moment. I mean, not under the best circumstances.
Right.
But yeah, they really knew each other. They really were childhood friends.
Wow.
I thought that was pretty cool. So back to this. 40 minutes after killing Dale Okazaki on March 18th, 1985, and only about a mile away, there was a young woman driving down the road. She noticed a car following her and decided to be proactive and get behind that car for a license plate number. Now she was blatantly following him. When they both got to a red light, Richard Ramirez got out of his car and confronted her for following him. She told him she was going to call the police since he had been following her. He told her that he had mistakenly thought she was someone else, but she didn't believe him and still demanded to know why he was following her. He told her the same thing over and over, but she called him a liar and said she was calling the police. He then reached into her rolled-down window on the driver's side and tried to yank her out of the car through the window, but the door was locked and he couldn't get her through the window. Then he saw that the passenger door was unlocked, and in a split second, he jumped over the hood of the car, and before she could lock the door, he was inside the car, sitting beside her. He wanted the up-close confrontation so he could see her fear. Then he shot her. She got out of the car and tried to crawl away, but he got out and shot her again, in the back this time. Veronica was left sprawled in the street. Her last words were, "Help me, help me." Later during an interview, Ramirez spoke of that moment saying, quote, "I was in alliance with evil that is inherent in human nature. That was who I was, walking death." End quote.
You have another woman that's standing up and, saying, no, I'm not doing this.
Yep.
But this whole scenario kind of made me feel like he's just a big old coward. Because she stood up to him. She's calling him a liar. She says she's going to call the police. And he does the whole, police slide across the hood, hop into the passenger thing, and then shoots her in the face. And then he's like, oh, I'm in alliance with evil.
Right.
And now he's being badass. It's
right.
But at first, she's like, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to get your license number, and I'm going to call the police, which kind of wish she would have. Women are being very...
Yeah, you're right. He's only brave and has Satan at his side when it's someone who's more helpless than him. A woman, somebody old, a child. And then you'll kind of see his MO with the men as we go on. But yes, he is definitely a big old coward.
And then he's badass when they're dead after he shot them.
Right. He's Mr. Walking Death. I don't think I said her full name, and I want to make sure to include that. Her name was Cy Leon, a.k.a. Veronica Yu, and she was 30 years old.
Oh,
I know. 10 days after the previous murders, on March 27, 1985, Richard Ramirez recalled a successful robbery of a very wealthy couple, Vincent and Maxine Zazzara. Vincent, age 64, and Maxine, age 44. He had robbed them the previous year in the city of Whittier, so he decided to go back for more. Ramirez went to the house, stepped on a 5-gallon plastic can, and was able to enter through an open bathroom window. Vincent was shot in the head as he slept on the couch. After being shot, he attempted to rise, but the tiny bullet had done its damage. The sound of the gunshot woke Maxine in the bedroom. She screamed as Ramirez ran into her room. He forced her onto her stomach and tied her up while he began ransacking the home. Maxine remembered there was a loaded shotgun under their bed that her husband had purchased the year before, promising to kill the thief who had robbed them. So while Ramirez was busy, Maxine was able to untie herself and grab the shotgun from under the bed. When Ramirez heard the unmistakable noise of the shotgun, he turned around and saw her aim it at him. He tried to reach for his own gun, but with no hesitation, Maxine was too quick and pulled the trigger. To her horror, only the sound of a metal click came from the gun. She was not aware that her husband had unloaded the shotgun because they had their grandchildren over that weekend, and he didn't want to take any chances.
I remember that. I remember that story.
It's so sad. So sad.
Of all times that he did that.
The one time. And he was waiting for Ramirez.
He was just ready.
He was waiting. And the one time. Ramirez screamed and went into a rage like never before. He was horrified that she thought to shoot him and actually tried to kill him. How dare she? He beat her savagely. Then he grabbed a knife and tried to carve out her heart, but couldn't get through her rib cage, so he changed it to an upside-down cross carved into her chest. Then he decided that since he couldn't have her heart, her eyes would be the prize. So he cut them out and put them in a small jewelry box that he took home with him. He raped her body and stabbed her genitals. He left their house with approximately $40,000 worth of jewelry and personal belongings. But in his savagery, he made mistakes. The biggest being a near-perfect shoe print where he entered the home in the flower beds. Following this crime and wanting to get better at killing, he picked up a police scanner so he would know when they were on their way.
This is the story that I actually know of someone that was their relative.
Oh.
That's why I remember this, and I wish I could remember who it was. But when you said something about him taking out her eyeballs, I remember that it was a relative of somebody that I knew at the time. And that's, I think, why I remember that story so well.
It's a pretty sick killing.
And you're right. There is no definite motive. There's no, not motive, but there's no, he's not doing things the same way twice.
No. And in this case, he went out of his way because he was so upset that she would have the nerve to try to kill him.
Now you have somebody who is not she did stand up to him, but it failed. Right. So now he's like, okay, now I'm in control. You thought you were in control for a minute. Right. Now I'm mad. I'm in control again. And so This is what I'm going to do.
Oh, it's so much. Trying to read him and what he may have been thinking and why he does the things he does is impossible. It's too much.
And honestly, I don't really want to understand.
No, I know.
I don't want to know what was going on behind those eyes.
Right. That would be a very scary place to be if you actually understood all that. All right. On May 14th, 1985, Bill Doy, 66 years old, and his 56-year-old wife, Lillian Doy, who had 2 years prior suffered a debilitating stroke that took away her ability to speak and most of her mobility, were preparing for their new van to arrive. This van was going to accommodate Lillian's special needs on their planned retirement trip to travel across the United States. They were both very excited. But unbeknownst to them, Ramirez had chosen their home to rob next. And as he was making his way in, he kept repeating his mantra, quote, "Satan, this what I, your humble servant, am about to do, I do for you," end quote. Upon entering, he found Bill asleep, and when Ramirez pulled back the chamber of his weapon, Bill woke up and tried to grab his 9mm pistol, but it was too late. Ramirez shot him in the head once and tried to shoot him a second time, but his gun jammed, so he beat him instead. Lillian woke up after hearing the noise and tried to scream out to Bill, but was unable to. Ramirez went into her bedroom and bound her with thumb cuffs. Another, where do you pull these out from? He then went through the house looking for valuables. During this time, Bill miraculously regained consciousness, but when Ramirez saw him stir, he beat him some more. After clearing out the house, Ramirez went back to Lillian and decided to rape her. A disabled woman. He finished his assault. This part is going to give me nightmares. He finished his assault by kissing her on the mouth. I don't know how you get over that.
I know this is a podcast, but I have no words.
Yeah. But left her still bound with the thumb cuffs when he left the house. Bill came to yet again and tried to reach his wife, but when he saw her condition, he forced himself to the phone to call 911 to save her before he died. Lillian Doy was found wearing thumb cuffs only on her left hand, while the thumb of her right hand was ripped apart and bleeding profusely when she had removed the cuffs. Thanks to her husband, Lillian survived the attack. She could barely communicate, but was able to let police know that the man was tall, slim, had bad teeth, and was dressed all in black.
Satan's colors?
There was actually a reason for why he wore black, and I can't think of it right now. I didn't write it down. I'll have to look that up. Maybe I'll...
And I'm sure some logical thing.
Right.
Why he wore black, because he was doing it at night and he wasn't seen.
There was a reason. I'll have to look it up, and this is going to be a two-parter, people. This is a very long one. So I'll look it up and we can talk about it in the second episode.
Okay.
But I don't know how you feel. I feel drained after this. This is rough.
This is very rough, and you get that combination feeling of what is wrong with him? What is wrong with the people that raised him, that he grew up around? I don't want to say I feel bad for him, but I think I kind of wonder if he wouldn't have had the 2 concussions and been around these people when he was growing up, if he might have turned out differently.
Even if he was just a little different. I mean, even a little different would be better than this level of depravity that he's just gone down a dark hole. And his
reasoning is for Satan.
Everything is for Satan, which becomes his excuse for doing everything evil that he can possibly think of.
Again, that's a coward.
Yeah, it's a coward, and it's a very, very sick person. Yes, so this is a rough one, but there is more to tell. The second episode...
I'll be honest, I'm a little horrified.
Oh, I'm a lot horrified. Believe me, I had to research this, and this is the condensed version. It's one of those things where, you have to make that decision of how much of the details you want to include. I do want a full story, but I don't want to say anything that's just going to, give people nightmares, because I feel like this already could give me nightmares.
No, this part's already giving me nightmares.
Right.
You don't want to leave your windows open. You want to be safe in your home, and you almost can't.
And we went through this. We were there. We were in the community. Whittier was literally right next to us. It
was.
And so was some parts of LA that he hit. This was a really rough time. But I am going to stop it here. We will do a second part. We'll continue on with what happens next, his next victims. We'll also talk about his capture, what ends up happening to him as he goes through with his court case.
Well, I want to say I can't wait, but again, like I said, I'm a little terrified.
You're like, give me a week. I need to breathe.
My brain needs to decompress from all of this.
That's how I feel. I feel like my brain has a black cloud over it right now.
It's dressed in black.
Right. And it has bad teeth. But this one was rough. So,
well, thank you for bringing it to us, and we will be waiting to see what happens next week.
Yes, all right.
Everyone, take care, and don't forget to let your imaginations run wild.
Bye-bye. We just want to thank you all for sharing your time with us. And if you'd like to send in your creepy little grim bits, we would love to hear your personal stories, interests, and suggestions. Please email them to grimwitwithdimwits@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at grimwitwithdimwits, Twitter at grimwitwithdimwits, and Facebook, grimwitwithdimwits. Join us every Monday for new episodes, and feel free to share us with your grim-loving friends.
We would really appreciate if you would take a minute to rate and review. 5-star ratings go a long way and would really help us out. Until then, we would love it if you'd come back next week to delve with us into the strange and unusual things we just can't wrap our skulls around.